Hi there. Welcome to the NBA DFS build for Friday, January 26th. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We're here to break down today's NBA DFS slate in an effort to point you to the best plays and top values while also highlighting positive game environments, ownership edges, and much more. If this video helps you at all, please give it a like and feel free to subscribe to our channel, the DFS build, to get alerted for more videos just like this. With that, we do have a very nice and also scary 7-game slate upon us. Although, as Taylor just said before we went live, it can't be any worse than last night. We're going to go through each game and try to go as quick as possible while offering our respective insight. So right away, let's just jump into it. We got some pretty big news with the Mavs and Hawks. Kyrie Irving is out. I do not believe we have any news on Trae Young yet. On the Dallas side, Maxi Kleber and Dwight Powell are also out, which could open up some value for Dallas. Taylor starting with the Mavs. Oh, by the way, I will note 1.5 point spread. Mavs are favored. 244 total. Starting with Dallas. Who do you like?
Yeah, it's a really obvious Luka spot. No Kyrie. Great matchup against Atlanta. He's 11-3, which is cheap for him. Going to be the most popular player on the slate, but I don't think it's bad. Other values, Derek Lively looks fine. Josh Green in the minutes he gets. Grant Williams is 3-4, which is just really cheap for anyone against Atlanta, especially someone with a real role. And Hardaway should see, I don't know if he started the last game without Kyrie. I didn't actually see that. But yeah, he looks really good too. Should see usage under 6K. It's going to be a situation where you're going to be playing a lot of them and probably trying to figure out which one's the best fade of the group.
Yeah, it's the exact same situation as last night. And the fact that it's the first game, it looks very alluring. The Hawks are a great matchup for DFS, and there's so much usage to go around. It's going to be really hard to not play 2 or 3 of these guys. Luka's obviously 70 fantasy point projection is absurd. So he's obviously a core play on this slate. You can fade him. He is super chalky, 46%. It's only going to be higher if you go into single entries. But I don't think I will. And then, like you said, a lot of these value guys are popping, look good, and I'm not going to waste time diving into them. I would probably just play the ownership game with some of them. If Josh Green's going to be super chalky, maybe don't play Josh Green because he's Josh Green. So, and I'm not worried about Tim Hardaway not starting. Obviously, his usage off the bench is always pretty good. So, all right, moving on to the Atlanta side. We don't know yet about Trae Young. Clint Capella also questionable. And, oh, man, big news. Wesley Matthews also might not play. So, the Hawks could be without some pretty serious guys who obviously the 2 main I just said. But it's a great game environment, and it's a 1-point spread with a crazy total. So who do you like here?
Pretty much everyone, just like the other day. Capella is going to be good if he plays. He's only 5'6". That's pretty cheap for his per minute production. Minutes are kind of shaky, but don't mind that for the cheap salary. Okongwu is the obvious kind of smash value on the slate if Capella's out. Not even a bad play if Capella's in. He gets minutes off the bench no matter what. Sadiq Bey really popping at 5-1. I get it. But if he's going to be really popular, I'm hoping there's someone else that'll look a little better than that. If Trey's out, obviously it's DeJounte again and Bogdan Bogdanovic again. Bogdanovic has been pretty mediocre in this situation over recent games, but 6'4", not necessarily too expensive for the role he should play if he starts. And if his recent games kind of lower his ownership, I'm interested.
Yeah, I think if Trae and Clint are in, the Hawks are just less appealing in general, and you can probably just rule out guys like DeJounte Murray just based off he's priced up now, because Trae was out before. Trae would be viable. Clint would be good. I mean, everybody is still in play either way, but I think Trae and or Clint being out makes these guys borderline core plays right there with the Dallas guys. So, again, a lot like last night, how much do we want to commit to the first game of the night? And guys that, for the most part, are going to be pretty chalky. Moving on, we actually have a pretty good game in this one, too. Phoenix in Indiana against the Pacers. The Suns are 5-point favorites. They've been playing really well. This is a nice 243.5 total. The Eric Gordon is questionable, and Tyrese Halliburton is still out for the Pacers, and I believe Jalen Smith is questionable again. So those are things to monitor. doesn't really do much for the Sun side, who beyond Gordon would be at full strength. But is anybody standing out for you in this spot for the Phoenix side?
Kevin Durant does. He's 9-2. His price isn't really moving. Indiana is obviously a really good matchup for production. Play at a really fast pace, even without Halliburton. He and Booker, both in the low 9Ks, looks really interesting. Even Beal for back under 7K is not bad. Wouldn't play more than one of them together, of course. KD is the one that stands out the most.
Yeah, KD last game, not to game log watch here, though. 38 minutes, 42 fantasy points, but he took 10 shots, and he had 12 real points. Just weird. But yeah, I think it's just a guessing game when these guys are at full strength. Brad Beal's a nice price, but he's major league third fiddle behind KD and Devin. Pick your poison with KD and Devin. I like them both. The prices are good projection, but they don't necessarily fully stand out depending on what happens with the Dallas Hawks guys. On the other side, you have Pascal Siakam leading the way as far as projection goes, but nobody else really stands out here. How are you feeling about the Pacers?
I don't think Turner looks bad for 6'3". Center, obviously a deep position with a lot of ways to go. Guys like Şengün and Lively seem like they'll be pretty popular. Not sure if Turner will get a lot of attention in the low sixes, but it is affordable relative to where he normally is. Siakam had a big ceiling game last night. Obviously can't bank on that again, but good game environment. He only played 30 minutes because the game was a blowout, so he had room for upside, even more than he showed already. And yeah, the rest of Indiana is usually just not that interesting because they have a deep rotation with a lot of wings they cycle in there.
Yeah, I would say the only issue with going to Turner would be his minutes feel a little bit erratic, and center has quite a few interesting plays. So I don't think he's a bad play. I think his price is really nice, but I don't know if the ceiling is there for me here. For the Pacers, I'm really just looking at Siakam here. I think he's way too cheap again. I'm not anticipating a triple-double or a crazy, crazy game, but at 7.5, you don't really need, his best game of the year. A pretty interesting game is next here with the Hornets traveling to Charlotte, the Rockets traveling to Charlotte to face the Hornets. The Rockets are 5.5-point favorites. A little bit surprising they're not bigger favorites with a 223.5 total. This game could really go either way. It's going to be a total blowout, or, it could be a sneaky shootout. Starting on the Houston side, who stands out?
Şengün, obviously, for 8.6 is just ridiculous. Like, he should be 9K or above, and he's not. And it's probably the best matchup imaginable, so I think he'll be more owned than his current number indicates, but still happy to eat that just because it is such a great spot. Jabari Smith, I think, for under 6K is interesting if he goes. He's been dealing with an ankle injury, so it's not a sure thing. If Smith and Jayshawn Tate are out, Jeff Green has a path to big minutes, as we saw in the last game. He's under 4K. He's not the best per minute guy, as you saw in the last game. Still didn't do anything in his 38 minutes, but hard to overlook that just for the dollar. And I guess you can make a case for Van Vliet, but I'm not super psyched about him or Jalen Green, honestly.
Yeah, that's crazy, 38 minutes. But if Tate and Jabari are going to be out and he starts again at 3.7, whatever, bro, I'm just going to consider it for sure, especially if you look at the other values and he ends up not being like mega chalk. It is Jeff Green. He's an ancient man, but it's also against the Hornets. So he's definitely in play. I love the price on the FVB, man. He stands out for sure. Şengün's obvious. I don't really care if he's chalky. He's very much in play at 8.6. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, Jalen Green's always an okay GPP flyer, especially at 6K flat against the Hornets here. He is a interesting tournament play. On the Hornets side, if the game stays close to the mellow ball, obviously looks really good, almost 10K, but he does not project for any ownership at all, which always makes ball more appealing. I know you like ball at least a little bit every time we talk tournaments. Is there anybody else for the Hornets that stands out, though?
I'm not against going back to Cody Martin, even though he's awful and was in the last game. Still cheap, still has a path to minutes with Rozier out of there. I'm willing to do it. I don't think he'll be popular like he was the other day, which adds to his appeal. Richards, Miller, and Bridges are all still reasonably priced. Bridges is playing tons of minutes, projected for 38, which is significant. Yeah, LaMelo, I get it. I just, if you're paying up for Luka, I don't really see a path to really getting to LaMelo, which there's merit if you want to do the pivot in tournaments at a cheaper salary, but Luka is just a vastly better play and a vastly better matchup.
100%. I totally agree. I will point out Brandon Miller. He's still staying steady at just 6.3K. Obviously, it's tough to trust rookies. It's tough to trust Hornets, and the matchup isn't good. But the price is pretty nice for a guy who is absolutely feeling it at the moment. He has 23-plus points, real points, in each of his last 4 games, and he's contributing elsewhere as a DFS player. So he's going to get a little bit of ownership, and it's not the best spot. But as like the last guy in, you could do a lot worse, I think. Moving on, we got the Clippers visiting the Raptors in Toronto. The Clippers are 8-point road favorites with a 230 and 235.5 total. Who do you like for LA?
With George questionable, and I think he's not going to play, I think Kawhi and Harden are priorities at this point. And they, if he's out, I assume that'll lower the ownership on Luka a little bit and maybe Şengün a little bit. Kawhi and James Harden are just both cheap, even with George projected in. They look pretty good. If he sits, they're going to share most of the usage. I think Russell Westbrook becomes pretty interesting at 6-1. Really good matchup against Toronto, whose defense is cratered since their trades and with Pirtle out. And I suppose you can make a case for Plumlee again, just because he's starting without Zoo, but don't love that. I assume Norm Powell will become a really good value too, with George out. Potential to start as well. I guess it could also be Amir Coffey, which for 3-2 with a path to 30 minutes becomes a really interesting punt play. So I think there's a lot of merit to getting to the Clippers, assuming PG sits.
You and Amir Coffey. I can't argue with any of that. Obviously, we'll have to wait to see what the ownership projection and the actual fantasy points projections end up looking like for Kawhi and Paul George and any of these ancillary pieces. I would mostly just be looking at James Harden. I'd mostly be looking at Kawhi and Harden here. Russ is totally fine, but he's also incredibly volatile, and trusting in Norman Powell or Amir Coffey doesn't feel great either.
I think Norman Powell, for sub 5K with the usage he gets and revenge, is pretty intriguing.
Oh, yeah.
I think he would probably become the best value on the whole slate.
Debatable for sure. He's definitely I think facing the Raptors in Toronto. That's true. But yeah, they all look solid if the game can stay close. On the other side, you got the Raptors. Obviously, they are without Emmanuel Quickly, so that opens up some usage up top. It puts Bruce Brown on our radar, which feels great. And Dennis Schroeder obviously should be starting and looks like an elite value. Who do you like here?
Oddly enough, the guy I'm kind of looking at most is Thad Young. Center only is not appealing, but he's under 4K. Minutes have been there since Pirtle went out, even with Jonte Porter starting. Thad Young often still seems to play his way into more minutes off the bench. So I think there's a path for him to get there, even at center only. Like you said, Schroeder, Bruce Brown should play big roles. Gary Trent also projected for 30-ish minutes. All are fine. Probably wouldn't play more than one of those guards together in a lineup. I just think there's a limited path to all of them getting there at the same time, even at cheap salaries, especially Schroeder and Trent. I assume Trent and Brown will start with Schroeder off the bench, but we'll see. And Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett should see a lot more ball handling with Quickly out and more usage. Obviously, Siakam's also gone. There's a lot to like. Scotty Barnes is affordable. Matchup's tough with Kawhi on the other side, but should be enough opportunity for him to get there. 38-minute projections, hard to overlook. And Barrett, even for 7-1, projects pretty well for the dollar. So this might be the most interesting game on the slate. If Paul George is out, I think you can stack it several different ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're doing one lineup, it starts to get pretty tricky here because if you're locking in Luka and then you look at Kawhi, Harden, Scotty Barnes, Şengün, these guys are all the same price. You can't play everybody, So
I don't think you have to lock in Luka for one thing, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm saying if you do, if you're saying Luka is 100% a guy I'm using, you at some point you got to make some decisions. So
Well, yeah.
when it comes to that, I mean, Scotty Barnes would be probably the first guy I'm not using because the Toronto value is more appealing by comparison. And in my opinion, I do agree that you can't just sit here and stack Raptors probably, because then you're just going to run into some dead weights that are going to bring your lineup down, most likely anyways. So for that reason, depending on what the starting lineup is, I'm probably looking at Bruce Brown, Dennis Schroeder, and Gary Trent the most. I hear your logic on Thad. The only problem is the Raptors have no rhyme or reason to how they use their centers. You got Thad, you got Chris Boucher, you got Jonte Porter. They even have Jalen McDaniels who can play smaller. So I mean, you just never actually know what they're going to do. So I wouldn't feel great about it for me personally. But lots of very interesting for Toronto, and obviously if Paul George is out, that game is very interesting for sure. The Orlando Magic are in Memphis. They are 6-point favorites with a nasty 212.5 total. It's not really an inviting DFS environment, but they do get to face the Grizzlies. So is there anybody for the Magic that you like?
I think like is probably a strong word. Wendell Carter's fine just because he's still cheap and has a path to minutes. But speaking of unpredictable center rotations, I don't really think you can say he's going to play 30 minutes with a lot of confidence. So plenty of ways that can go wrong. I suppose it's fine if he's going to be overlooked, which I think he should be. But yeah, this game has a low total. It generally looks disgusting. So not really getting anyone else on Orlando.
Nope, I agree 100%. It's Wendell or bust for me as well. On the Memphis side, I mean, the game environment makes you not be too interested in Grizzlies. And as we've been discussing here, there's a lot of value opening up across the first several games. So looking at the slate initially, I thought, oh, man, I'm going to have a lot of Grizzlies, I guess. But maybe we don't have to. That said, they do offer value, and JJJ looks pretty interesting up top. Are you looking at Grizzlies seriously on this slate?
Yeah. Jackson being the obvious standout. He was awful in the last game, but usage has been there with all these other guys out. Matchup against Orlando is not ideal, but Jackson still has a ceiling he can offer by himself. Aldama looks fine. I think he started the last game he played at center over Tillman. So if that happens again, indeed. So if he plays, like I said, he's a good value at 5-1. Scottie Pippen, maybe if he starts, he's 3-3. Played really well in the last game off the bench behind Gilliard. But they haven't projected for 1 minute, so not looking too good for him.
Yeah.
Luke Kennard back would probably tank him.
Yeah, I think any of the cheap guys that start you can look at. Nobody stands out because this matchup really, really stinks. Kennard's totally fine. Vince Williams is totally fine. Conchar or Roddy, if either of them end up starting, I think you can totally use them at their prices. But nobody projects amazingly here except for JJJ. He's got a really good price. But as you said, this matchup and the game environment in general just doesn't look very promising. So I think you can use Memphis guys for value, especially because I think they're going to be less owned than they would have been with all this other value opening up. But I might want to get away from it if I can. Moving on to OKC versus New Orleans. The Pelicans have been a bit of a pesky defense, and the Thunder have to take them on the road. The Pels are 1-point favorites, though, with a 239.5 total. Am I reading that right? Good Lord. Okay, so this game environment looks pretty inviting. SGA obviously starts us off here. Who do you like for the Thunder?
Yeah, he, for some reason, never gets more expensive. He's 10-1. Should probably be 11K plus by now, but he's not. No one's going to play him with Luka garnering ownership and potentially James Harden in the lower range pulling ownership, and the Toronto guards that we talked about. So an unknown SGA in a close game with a high total sounds awfully appealing to me. J-Dub and Chet always seem to pop around 7K. They look fine again tonight. Don't think either's a priority. Certainly not Chet at center where there's tons of options to like elsewhere. Williams, I'm happy to get to. And that's it for OKC.
Yep, I agree completely. On the Pels side, Zion starts us off. However, he is questionable to play. So obviously if he's out, that could change the slate even more. Who stands out for you with or without Zion in the
I think CJ and Ingram stand out regardless as pretty low-owned pieces to consider. Even if Zion's in, they look fine. Ingram in particular, cheaper than Zion, not pulling any ownership. OKC is certainly good defensively, but the Pelicans are favored in this game, which is worth noting and quite interesting. Happy to get to both of them, especially if Zion's out. They should become more popular. I don't think they'll be chalky, though, especially if we get Clippers for a few $100 more. I think these guys could and should fly under the radar a little bit. Larry Nance is always kind of there as the backup center. Big game in the last game, only 19 minutes, though. So it's really hard to feel great about that. But he is, it's the same play as Thad Young, a backup center for 3-9, essentially. And, I suppose if Zion's out, Trey Murphy and Herb Jones become a little bit better. Trey Murphy presumably starts. So you can kind of put him in the Norm Powell bucket of really good sub 5K value with the potential for a promotion. But yeah, I guess I would just wait and see who starts for Zion. I guess it could be Najee Marshall as well or Dyson Daniels, but this team will be a lot more interesting if they're shorthanded.
Yeah, I'm trying to get updated numbers here. And yep, Brandon Ingram gets the biggest boost overall with Zion out. So I guess that would be my lean. But as you said, CJ is obviously very much in play. JV historically tends to smash when Zion's out. So if Zion is out, JV at 6'7" looks very appealing. I would imagine he would eat Chet's lunch. So yeah, I like the Pels quite a bit. It's very interesting because anytime like you have a Clipper situation where these guys are good prices and all of a sudden their usage gets inflated, you think, oh man, I have to play them. But we have the exact same situation in this game, but these guys are cheaper and they might be less owned. So this is just going to be, what does ownership look like going into lock, and if everybody's going to be gravitating towards the Clippers, the Pels look very, very interesting. And same to your point about Luka versus SGA. I mean, obviously Luka with a projection of 70, very hard to get away from. But if SGA can approach what he does, that is major salary savings and quite the leverage play. All right, last game of the night, we got Cleveland going back to Milwaukee. I feel like these teams face every other night, and every game is a blowout. The Bucks are 5.5-point favorites at home with a 237.5 total. Starting on the Cleveland side, who stands out for you?
Well, sad to say that Isaac Okoro and George Niang look pretty interesting.
Gross.
They're both under 4K. Both have roles with the team shorthanded. I think LeVert might be one of the better mid-range plays on the slate for 5-6 with Garland down, clear past the minutes. Even the bench. Allen and Mitchell fine. Allen stands out more a little bit, but this whole team looks pretty intriguing. I guess Mitchell, he's kind of a tier below SGA, but he projects really similarly, and the matchup is better, I think, for Mitchell. So don't love it. Not dying to get to Cleveland, but they do look pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we just talked about these guys 2 days ago, and not much has changed. The only thing is that we know LeVert is in, unless he's randomly, questionable out again. But so yeah, nothing really changes. Mitchell and Jarrett up top look good, and everybody else to me is just kind of filler. Nobody really stands out to me. On the Bucks side, you have Giannis up top. He crushed against Cleveland, 80 fantasy points last game. Triple. Do you have a triple double? I think he may have. Either way, I'm not going to wait to find that out. Either way, he's averaging 72 fantasy points against them on the year. So he's obviously a good play at 11K, probably not expensive enough. Quite the pivot off of Luka, especially if he's not going to be owned. So do you like him? Are you considering him over Luka? And do you like any other Bucks tonight?
Yeah, I mean, he and SGA, very good pivots for less than Luka, which should be a fraction of the ownership. I mean, unless a lot breaks, it's going to be hard to pay out for both. Although, if Clipper news breaks a certain way, Pelicans news breaks a certain way, I do think the kind of stars and scrubs build with Giannis and Luka becomes increasingly doable. They are both only around 11K, and the matchup's awesome for both. I mean, the matchup shouldn't be awesome for Giannis, but he's had no problems with it. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, that's pretty intriguing. I would like to do that if it's possible. Fading Şengün to get that is fine with me. Chris Middleton's getting pretty cheap. The minutes have stabilized for him. Matchup is fine. He always kind of seems to be hovering in the 30 to 40 range and his 32-ish minutes, so don't mind that. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for them.
Yeah, I would argue that that strategy you just suggested might be even more intriguing if those situations are more inviting. If PG-13 is out, if Zion is out, and ownership starts going away from the studs beyond Luka, then adding in SGA or Giannis with Luka, or going SGA Giannis, I mean, those things become pretty appealing to me. But I mean, obviously, there's so many different ways you can go on the slate. It's not a small slate. There's a lot of pending news. Obviously, Kyrie already being out is pretty big too. So let's try to wrap it up in another minute or two here. First, let's go with your top play of the day that you are probably going to be exposed to the most if you're running multiple lineups tonight.
It's Luka. I don't want to say Luka because that's a cop out. I'll say Donovan Mitchell just because he's been a little frosty lately. The matchup for ball handlers against the Bucks is good though. Perhaps that changes now that they ditched their old coach, but I'm willing to go back to the well. He's only 9.5. He's come down a bit with a little recent frosting. So I'll go with Donovan Mitchell as my kind of conviction, but that's subject to change, of course, with pending news.
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you on Luka. I don't think that necessarily means you have to play him, but he is the best play on the board as far as raw projection goes. Şengün really stands out. And then for a value, Dennis Schroeder. If he's starting at least 5.2 for a guy who's going to have the ball in his hands a ton, that's pretty appealing. Obviously, I don't want to be convicting with guys that we don't know about yet. You know, I don't want to tell you to go play guys that we're not sure are going to have those roles. So we talked about those situations and just adjust as needed when the news breaks. How about fade? So let's wrap it up with your number one fade based off of current ownership.
Sadiq Bey, probably 25% seems pretty high for him on a slate that will likely have more value in the 5K range. Obviously, if that value emerges, he won't be as popular. But as things stand, I'm not really psyched about him or Josh Green at nearly a third of the field ownership.
Yeah, I second you on Josh Green. I don't mind him. I think the price is good. The matchup is great. So if he starts, I mean, I totally see the logic in playing him. So I'm kind of like, I can go either way on that one. The one that stands out the most, though, would be RJ Barrett. I actually like him as far as what his role is going to be and his projection, but he is 7.1. So if a 7.1K guy is going to be really chalky, you can just go a little bit lower or a little bit higher and probably get, just as good or better. So that'd probably be the one I'm fading. I think that does it overall for us. Hopefully walking through this helps you a little bit. If it does, like this video and subscribe to our channel for alerts to future videos. All right. Good luck tonight.